Hello and welcome to another drawing lesson. Today I'm going to do a very quick sketch of a car in motion and a perspective sketch, and I'm going to try and describe what goes through my head and what I'm thinking about as I'm doing it. I've got a couple of reference photos for this vehicle, a side view and a slightly off front view, and that will tell me enough about the shape of the car to be able to draw it from any angle. So you don't need some reference that's exactly the angle you want to draw it in. So the first thing I usually do when I start is to draw a pair of axles. And the axles are good because they give you a kind of a perspective guide going off to a vanishing point. And on those axles you can then place 4 very lightly drawn wheels. Once you've got those 4 wheels in front of you, it gives you a really good idea of the camera angle and how dramatic the perspective is, and it kind of lets you know where everything else needs to fit. Then I construct the car as if I'm constructing the real car. So on those axles I place some chassis rails, and on those chassis rails I put the shape of the radiator. And then that radiator shape gets extruded back to make a sort of tunnel shape, and ends with a pointy tail, like a boat tail. And you can reinforce that tunnel shape with a few sort of contour lines that wrap around it, like the joins in the bonnet and things. And you can also cut chunks out of it, like the bit where the driver sits. Next I'm adding the headlights, and notice that I do an axis for the ellipse first, which follows the rest of my perspective lines, and that just reminds me that I need to tilt those ellipses over rather than having them vertical, which would be the temptation. There's a few more lights at the back there, and a windscreen and the top of the roof. And again, that all needs to match your perspective guides that have been set up by the axles and the chassis rails. Notice I'm drawing very, very lightly at this stage. So you really don't want to push too hard on anything, because a lot of this is just kind of feeling your way around, working things out, and some of it you don't necessarily want to draw attention to at the end in the finished sketch. It's just something you're doing to help work out what's going on. So if you draw nice and lightly for all of this stage, you'll be able to not use a rubber and just kind of correct things later on with some firmer lines. So I'm just working my way around the picture, just trying to see which bits jump out at me as not quite fitting right. I'm only concentrating on the really big forms, really, the axles and the wheels and the cylinder shape that sits on top of it all. Now I'm just starting to, because I'm happy with that now, I can start to work my way around the picture again and add some of the smaller details that I don't want to lose when I start shading things. So there are things like the cross on the radiator, and the shape of the wheel arches, just sort of defining those a bit more. I've got the canvas roof that goes over the top. It's quite a simple car to draw, this one. It's all quite boxy. So no front brakes on this one, but a nice pair of leaf springs sticking out the front. The radiator is really, really far back on this car. It's much further back than you'd normally see. They're generally somewhere around the middle of the wheel, whereas this one's way back behind the back edge of the wheel. So I'm getting to the point now where I've kind of got a suggestion of all the details in that I want to include. There's a little toolbox or something on the side there. I've got the door and the little louvers, things that you don't want to overlook when it comes to shading and things. So they're kind of placeholders and reminders. So now I'm starting to work my way around the picture again, so another pass, and I'm just pressing slightly firmer and adding anything else that I might have missed, like the dust and things like that. Just wanted to draw attention to that boat tail a little bit more. But yeah, I'm just at the point now where I'm thinking, right, I've got all the important stuff in. I can start to darken some of these they're sort of underneath edges of things, or add a little bit of detail to things like the headlights, and things like the brackets that hold them up. The tricky thing with this sort of sketch is where you want it to have some liveliness and some movement, not to be tempted to go around everything doing a really hard, clean outline. I want to leave areas very loose and sketchy, because I find a quick dashed off sketch has a bit more energy than one that's very, very carefully traced repeatedly to clean everything up. Sometimes you need to have that, if it's going to be maybe printed on a t-shirt or something, but if it's just a sketch for the sake of the sketch, then why not have it loose and sketchy. So now I'm starting to do some shading, and I've jumped straight in with some really dark parts, just partly because they're good fun, but also they're bits that your eye is going to be drawn to. I realised recently that that low lights, or the very darkest parts of a sketch, they act in the same way as the highlights. So if you've done a painting, for instance, and then right at the end you get a bright white brush and dab some tiny little crisp white highlights on the corners of things to make them really pop and shine, like the highlights in an eyeball or something like that, they really jump out at you, and they just make the picture kind of zing. And the very, very darkest darks can do the same thing. So in this picture that I'm working on white paper, it's going to be hard to do white highlights, isn't it? So those really, really dark shadows are going to perform the same task. The danger is, just as with adding white highlights, you have to be careful not to add too many of them. If you go around putting lots of darks all over the place, and they're all disjointed, then it can start to distract the viewer, and they won't know where the focal point is anymore. It will look a bit kind of bitty. So the thing is to use them reasonably sparingly, and then just use some of the other values, the other shades, to just kind of fill in darks and lights. There are some places where you definitely want a nice strong dark, sort of on those really dark shadows in the interior and things. And it's a nice way to kind of highlight the design of the radiator. So I'm just doing the wheels freehand here, because the car's in motion. I don't need to draw perfect ellipses. They can just be kind of close enough and have a bit of energy about them. If I was doing a more precise drawing, and perhaps the car was parked stationary rather than in action, I might resort to using some templates just to clean those ellipses up and make them perfect. But for this kind of a light car that's flexible and that's hurtling down the road, and maybe a dusty, bumpy road, everything's going to be bending and twisting a bit, so it's all right to get your ellipses sort of loose. So I'm just adding a little bit of shadow underneath the car, and I'm doing that in the direction of travel, so that you get kind of reinforces the sense of speed, that there's a bit of motion going on, like a speed blur. Getting towards the end of the sketch now, there's not too much more to do. I'm just sort of seeing where I might have missed bits. A few more of those very dark darks. Things like the badge on the radiator. Darkening those corners of things where the light won't travel very much. And I'm trying to avoid shading the tops of the wheel arches and tops of surfaces, just so we reinforce that feeling of a three-dimensional shape. A few bits of dust and things, they're always good for. They're a bit more subtle than a whiz line, but it's just instant action. If you add a few bits of, a few little stones flying around, it just instantly conjures up a feeling of speed. And that's pretty much the end, I think. Not much further off. Sometimes I might just put it to one side for a few minutes and have another look at it a bit later. But yeah, it kind of looks about right. Maybe a few little rivets that I've missed. I hope you found it interesting to have a look at what goes through my head when I'm trying to draw a car. Do tune in for another one soon, and if you've really enjoyed it, do subscribe and follow me along on YouTube or something. Thanks very much for watching. Bye.